On and off over the years in the FGC, I've heard people talk of the fighting game to Final Fantasy XIV pipeline. Talk about how 14 is the FGC's retirement home, and things of that sort. Just as those prophecies had foretold, I came to Final Fantasy XIV from fighting games and clicked into the game extremely well. I never did retire though, I definitely still play fighting games actively. I've definitely put a totally reasonable amount of time into the game so far. Anyway, as a fighting game fan myself, I wanted to make a video to talk about the things I like about 14, some of the things that might be an explicit hook for fighting game players, and just to give my general glowing recommendation for the game. If anything you see here piques your interest, definitely give the game a shot. There's a ton to love about 14, and it's almost a certainty that there's something in it that could hook you. So, without further ado, let's take a quick look at the old retirement home. One of the biggest things I think is a huge hook that catches fighting game players is the building of muscle memory in Final Fantasy XIV. You don't have to learn any motion inputs to cast spells like you would in a fighting game, but generally, executing an action will require pressing different combinations of buttons depending on your chosen peripheral. Fighting game players condition themselves to build muscle memory for combos, and in a fighting game, executing a combo begins to feel satisfying once you gain consistency in your execution. Your rotation in Final Fantasy XIV is built similarly to the way you would do combos in fighting games. To make a comparison of your rotation to normal combo structure, it's almost like you're trying to keep an infinite up on your opponent. This is more engaging than it might sound though, because while you're trying to keep the rhythm up to not drop the combo, your opponent is throwing all manner of insanity at you to stop you. In a traditional fighting game, getting a hit and executing a combo through muscle memory is a period where you can take a moment to relax and determine how you plan to play out the rest of the round. In 14, however, there are downtime periods during fights, but it's very common in modern fight design for the most complicated part of your rotation, usually referred to as the burst window, to overlap with difficult fight mechanics. The chaos that ensues while everyone's learning how to apply their rotation to a fight while still learning the mechanics makes progressing the content very rewarding and enjoyable. But gameplay alone isn't usually enough draw for the FGC. Usually, players need a character that they vibe with to really become attached to a game. One of the most vital draws in a fighting game are its characters. Whether you're playing as them or fighting against them, the characters have to be cool or otherwise appealing to draw a player to them. In 14, your own character is designed by you, and you have a plethora of options to choose from to determine how you'd ultimately like them to look. There are tons of different pieces of gear and dyes, so you can make your character look completely unique to everybody else's if you want to. Learning a new class in Final Fantasy XIV is similar to picking up a new character in a fighting game. You discover how each of their unique movesets and systems work, and then slowly learn how to best optimize your play for every mechanical situation presented to you by your opponent. As an example, my main class of choice is the Black Mage. Black Mage is a class that uniquely needs to spend as much time as possible standing still to complete casts. Therefore, when playing Black Mage, you have to be very careful about optimizing your resources that allow you to move, otherwise you're going to drop the combo. You already know your opponent is mashing on Wake Up, so don't drop the combo! Juxtapose this against a tank class like Paladin, where your generalized rotation is easier than a DPS, but you have to worry about properly spacing out your mitigations so you're not caught empty-handed when the tank buster pulls up. As a tank, you also control the boss's positioning, so you've got to be careful to ensure that the boss is never facing the party so that nobody dies while you're taking hits, while also worrying about what the boss is going to be throwing at you simultaneously. The biggest and most impactful character designs you can come across are by far the bosses. From mainline Final Fantasy villainous monstrosities to Final Fantasy XIV original fiends, the boss designs in this MMO do not disappoint. These boss fights are the core of the game and comprise almost the entirety of the endgame raiding scene. Boss encounters are defined by the mechanics they bring to the table, different little unique puzzles they present which first need to be solved and then correctly executed to proceed in the fight. Now, as somebody coming from a genre as difficult and competitive as fighting games, you probably like a bit of a challenge, so let's talk a little bit about difficulty in Final Fantasy XIV. I once saw somebody online comparing hitting a double weave to feeling like a fighting game player hitting a one-frame Link. Whoever it was that wrote that is completely insane. My jaw dropped when I read it, and it still lives rent-free in my head. The difficulty in 14 does not come from tight execution, but rather from effectively solving mechanics while keeping the infinite up without dropping it. The content difficulty is divided along a clear curve, from normal difficulty content to Alliance raids, then to Extreme Trials, Savage raids, and finally, Ultimates. If you ever find yourself looking for a serious challenge, look no further than 14's Ultimate raids. These things are brutally precise, extremely punishing 15 to 20 minute encounters where extremely clean and consistent play is required if you ever want a shot at the clear. They are hulking behemoths of fights, wherein you take on multiple bosses from previous content back to back to back, usually with an additional form to cap it off. They possess new and more difficult spins on old mechanics, along with entirely new ones to make things extremely spicy. The hardest thing I've ever done in a video game to date is clearing the Dragonsong's Reprise Ultimate fight by myself with random groups of players I found in the Party Finder during Endwalker. It took me around 3 weeks of time to get to the end, and I played a ridiculous amount of time in those 3 weeks. If you plan to take on something as difficult as an Ultimate, I strongly advise you to try out some Savage raids first, maybe an Extreme if you've never done Savage. Be sure to respect the content, it's definitely no joke. You can make it a lot easier to progress by forming a static group of people who meet up consistently to tackle the fight with you every week. Significantly more so if somebody has already cleared the fight and is willing to join the group and help out. Fighting games are a fantastic competitive multiplayer experience, but with one annoying drawback. Generally, your only option to play a fighting game with your friends is to play against them. This becomes very disappointing very quickly if there's a gap in player skill between you and your friends. If both players don't have the fortitude to grind it out and get stronger together, the gap will only widen, and the games will become less playable together. There are only a few exceptions to this sort of situation in fighters, with games like Street Fighter Cross Tekken or the upcoming project formerly known as L, allowing you and your friend to fight on the same team against a team of opponents. But generally, you and your friend are going to have to go head-to-head against each other. Because of this, it's a complete breath of fresh air to be able to fight alongside your friends instead of against them, overcoming ever more challenging bosses and popping off as a team in victory or in sorrow because you overcame the harrowing experience together. There aren't many situations in gaming as exciting as finally accomplishing a difficult goal you and your group have been working to overcome together for weeks, inching your way towards the victory that gets a little bit closer after every pull of the boss.
DPSLB?
DPSLB, DPSLB. Here's buff.
Kill it!
Oh my god.
Holy fuck!
Fucking shit.
Let's go!
Holy shit, man. First full!
Oh my god! Fighting games frequently have some incredible composers working on them. take Daisuke Ishiwatari for an example. His soundtracks are so sick that people often joke about how his new album is coming out with a cool free game. Final Fantasy XIV also has an incredible music team, led by Masayoshi Soken, and this team has created some absolute bangers for the fights in the game. Even some of Nobuo Uematsu's famous pieces received absolutely astounding remasters for 14, including legendary songs like Dancing Mad from Final Fantasy VI and The Extreme from Final Fantasy VIII. The soundtrack features a ridiculously diverse range of music, featuring well over 500 songs, with even more on the way in the upcoming expansion. The music ranges from incredibly calming and mellow songs like Sands of Amber, to deliciously bombastic themes sung by a choir like From the Heavens. To heart-wrenching songs like Dragonsong.
And death on afterthought to those who fight for naught alone.
To songs that are both very unique and intense, like Under the Weight. There's such an absurd range to the music in Final Fantasy XIV that even if you don't plan to play the game at all, I'd recommend at least giving some of the boss themes a flip through. Hell, the game even has music from Nier in it, and if you've played those games, you've already got an idea of how great the soundtrack is. The story modes in fighting games are unfortunately usually pretty lackluster. If you've been craving something better to sink your teeth into, 14 gives you a deep and long-running narrative to dive into and immerse yourself in. The story of 14 starts off slow, planting the seeds for events to come in the future. The pacing throughout the rest of the game never gets a great deal faster, but the content it presents becomes far more exciting and interesting as it goes along, building upon the foundations laid in previous chapters and thriving for it. The story has a very solid payoff, and it's definitely worth the time spent. Take it easy and don't worry about rushing through. 14 is definitely the kind of game where you want to take your time to slow down and just smell the roses a little. If you're already completely certain you have no interest in the story, you're able to pay for a story skip and a level skip, but I only recommend this as a last resort. A lot of the game is built with the foundation of the story in mind, and if you buy a skip with the intent to skip straight into the difficult content, you might become overwhelmed by an information overload and bounce off the game as a result. Playing through the game will give you a much more solid understanding of the mechanics and the game itself, which will provide you with a much more natural transition into the difficulty scale. I thought I'd put together a couple of simple and quick class recommendations for some of the different fighting game character archetypes, in case you want to pick up the game and aren't sure where to start. It's a very different style of game though, so take these recommendations with a grain of salt. Definitely make sure to try out whatever classes look the most fun and interesting to you first and foremost. None of the classes are substantially more difficult to learn than the others, so don't let difficulty influence your decision. All classes are viable to clear any content in the game. This is one game where you don't have to worry about Sanford Kelly's legendary advice. I only touch on a few of the classes here, so make sure to take a look at the full list of jobs. These recommendations may be subject to change when the upcoming expansion Dawn Trail releases, though I don't really expect many of the class changes to be super drastic. Off the bat, Dragoon is the class that I would consider to be the closest to the Shoto playstyle. It is a very static rotation that rarely ever deviates, and it gives you all the tools you'd need to branch off to and adapt to any of the other DPS classes easily afterwards. It's also got some cool looking and flashy dive attacks, with a backflip being its reaction movement option. If you like fast characters who like to stay up close to their opponent while smothering them with a barrage of attacks requiring you to press a lot of buttons quickly, I'd recommend trying out Monk. For those who like more technical characters in fighting games, I would recommend Ninja. If you've ever played Magicka or Nine the Phantom in BlazBlue, Ninja is built around a similar system where you combine 3 different symbols in different ways to create different abilities. If you like to be far away from your opponent and free in your movement, give Machinist a shot. Machinist has a couple of useful defensive mitigations and the highest personal damage output of the ranged physical classes, retaining completely free movement all the while. If you really want to peer into the depths of optimization, take a look at some advanced Black Mage guides. This class is definitely the one that can be pushed the furthest in the optimization department. However, it's also the most awkward to play because of its slow cast times and limited movement, so the class definitely isn't for everyone. Now this next recommendation might be a little bit of a stretch, but I'd say that if you're into the set play style characters, but also like the idea of healing, consider trying out Scholar. Scholar requires you to plan ahead a little bit as a shield healer with the deployable fairy, and you're rewarded for planning your defensives and heals strategically to prevent damage from happening in advance. It would be remiss of me not to mention the PvP at least tangentially to fighting game players, so let me give you a brief rundown. The PvP in 14 is not built competitively. It was recently reworked and was significantly improved to be a lot more fun to play, so I recommend taking a crack at it just to experience the high-octane, explosive gameplay it provides. PvP works completely differently from the rest of the game, and your class is retooled to be a lot simpler to understand and more streamlined, with less buttons to worry about. There's a lot of fun to be had in the PvP, but don't go into it expecting the competitive depth you'd find in a fighting game, because you definitely won't find it there. Thanks for sticking through to the end of the video. There were some server issues while I was trying to record some clips, so I hope you were satisfied with the ones I decided to use instead. If you don't already play 14, I hope this video convinced you to give it a shot, and if you already do, maybe we'll get to meet up in PF sometime. Good luck out there, stay safe, and I hope to see you all in Eorzea.